Hello everyone, this is April with CraftKnifeChronicles, and this is the first part of a video series in which I demonstrate the construction of the project called North Pole All Wrapped Up. If you have not seen the completed project tour video, I suggest that you take a moment and go ahead and watch that so you'll know what this project is all about. Now in the description area below you will see a link that will take you to a Dropbox location where you can download 3 files for free. There's a materials and cutting guide, there's templates, and then there is assigns and windows. And they are all PDF files so that you will be able to open them on any computer. Now let's look at each one of these in turn for a moment. First we have the materials and cutting guide, and on the first page it lists the materials and supplies that you'll need on the left and the tools that you will need, and that's in addition to common tools on the right. The paper I used was Tim Holtz Paper Stash Christmas from 2017. This is an 8x8 pad. It has 24 sheets of paper. There are 2 each of each design. And if you don't use this paper and you use a similar, 8x8, you will need to have the same kind of quantity of paper. You need at least 2 sheets of each design, and I use just about every sheet of paper in this pad. Also, the North Pole is 11 inches tall, so you need a taller piece of paper, and I am using a candy stripe paper. The one I used is listed here in the materials and supplies. You can use any 12 by 12 paper you want, but it does need to be 12 by 12. The chipboard used in this project is a 1/16 of an inch thick. That's usually called medium weight chipboard. All the measurements are sized for that weight of chipboard. The materials guide lists cardstock in 3 lines: any color, coordinating color, and black. Now the any color, they're just used for joining strips. It can just be any color. The coordinating color is the finishing strip. So whatever paper you're going to use, then you want a paper that, a cardstock that will coordinate it with that. I decided to use a dark navy blue, so that's what you'll see me use on this project. And then the black is for coloring with the Distress Oxide inks to go in the back of the niches. The only other special paper is to print the windows and signs. You can use a matte photo paper. You can also use white cardstock, but with a fine printing on the printing settings, it may not be quite as nice as printing it on photo paper. Score tape, just to prep all the joining and finishing strips, will take probably a roll and a half of 1/4 inch tape, so you'll need several rolls of that, and other sizes will be helpful as well. And I think everything else here is pretty self-explanatory. Whatever you use for doorknobs, it needs to be low profile. I used in the niches the Christmas typography set from Tim Holtz. If you're going to have hanging decorations, it talks about thread and screw eyes or hooks, and then other different materials are listed as well. Under the tools, you need some way to measure, sorry about glare here, some way to measure 1/16 of an inch, and I use these rulers by Westcott. You can use whatever you want. You will see me cut with them even though they don't have a metal edge. I'm pretty used to cutting with them that way. Sometimes I do happen to cut into them, but you need to be very careful if you're going to do that. You can always measure with a ruler like this and then switch to a metal edged ruler for cutting. I use a fine line detail glue. In addition to just my regular glue, it has a very fine tip on it. I think everything else on here is pretty self-explanatory. At the end of the tools, I recommend 10 quart-size baggies. they don't have to be brand new as long as they're clean. I reuse the same ones over and over. I use that kind of thing to organize all my little pieces for the project. I'm hanging snowflakes up inside of my niches. Of course, you can put whatever you want. One of the niches is fairly large, so I used this size snowflake from the Stacked Snowflakes Tim Holtz die. And then all the other niches, I stacked up snowflakes from this Paper Snowflakes Thinlits die. Now on to page 2. Starting with page 2, we have the cutting guide. It starts with medium weight chipboard. All of these pieces are the size. You need to cut them accurately. And then over here in the notes, it tells you also what size of pattern paper is needed for this, so you don't have to listen really carefully when I say that in the video or make a note. So you'll have that right here to refer to. So medium weight chipboard here, this page, buildings 1 through 7. The next page has buildings 8 and some miscellaneous things. And the box sides, all of the buildings have, except for the North Pole, have a box inside. That's what I call the niche sometimes. And they're all cut from a 1-inch deep pieces. So I just listed them all together so that you know you can cut 9 strips that are 1 by 12. And then here's the list what you need for those. Just label them, label everything carefully, and put them in your baggies, and you won't get confused. Down here on the bottom of the second page is the cardstock cutting guide. You'll need both joining strips and finishing strips. It tells you what size you need and whether or not you need to prep them with score tape. I'm using black for my joining strips, and so here they are. They're 3/4 of an inch, scored at 3/8, and they're prepped on the outside of this V with score tape. And then this is my finishing strips, and they are again 3/4 inch, scored at 3/8. At this time the score tape is on the inside. On the 4th page, it just has some notes that we'll refer to as we're going along with the construction again, so that you don't have to take notes or say, you know, to yourself, what did she say? You've got this to refer to as we're going along. And then also on the last page here, there's a lot of windows and doors, and this is how I put them on, and I just made a little list and thought that would be helpful for you. So that's the materials and cutting guide. Now the templates, there is a template that shows the dimensions for the opening that we'll refer to when we cut the openings for all of the buildings. Then there is 2 of the buildings have external parts. There's a reindeer yard and a patio for the sweet shop that we'll cut out. And then, as I was mentioning at the beginning, the pattern paper gets used up pretty extensively, so I just made a drawing so I would know that I would have sufficiency, and if you cut carefully, you will be able to get everything out of the paper that you have, and we'll refer to this again in a few minutes. And then a window placement guide that we'll talk about when we get to it. The 3rd file is the signs and windows. I just thought it'd be easier to have all the windows already made. All you have to do is cut them out and put them on the building. And then I got some clip art to make some signs for some of the buildings as well. You could, of course, use anything you want for the windows. If you have small dies, you could use them. I mean, you use your imagination, but this is how I wanted to do it, and so I included it in case you want to do it as well. So that's all I think I wanted to say as far as an introduction. So let's get started. I'm going to start by cutting out all of my medium weight chipboard pieces. They're listed here on the first page of cutting in the materials and cutting guide, and also on the second page of cutting where it says medium weight chipboard. And for all of these, the stiffness of the chipboard should always be along the longest dimension. So when you pick up a piece of chipboard like this, one side is more flexible than the other side. This side hardly bends at all. So the longest side should always be along that stiff side. So I'm going to cut these pieces. I always start by laying out and figuring out where are my biggest pieces and then cutting those out. And then whatever I have left over, I cut the smaller pieces out of. When I cut my ledger strips, they're 1/4 of an inch wide. And I have a guillotine cutter, so it makes quick work of this, but you can cut it by hand. It just will, take your time. But if you're using a big cutter for these small strips, just put some score tape on one section and cut those first so you'll have the body of this to hold on to when you do that. So I'm going to cut my pieces, make sure I label them for their building and their name, and then I'll put them in their baggies. So this is what I had left out of my chipboard when I used 9 sheets, and you can see here under miscellaneous it says reserve scrap for shim, 3 inches by longest available, so I'll be able to use this piece for that, and another piece that says 1 or 1.5 inches by longest available, so I can get that out of this piece or else whatever I cut off of here. So just save your scraps because you'll need some shims when you go to put the unit together. So I've got all my pieces cut and they're sitting here in this extra cardboard box in their baggies, and I'll just show you the labeling. They all have their building number on them, and then even these little pieces, they say that it's the box, it says FC, which I know stands for floor and ceiling. It also tells me when I was cutting all of these little 1-inch pieces, I put the length on there because some of them are very similar, and that way I don't get confused when I'm building the boxes. So I have all my little baggies and all my chipboard parts cut. Next, if you have not cut your ledger strips, they're the 1/4 inch by 12 inch strips. If they did not have score tape on them when you cut them, you'll need to put score tape on the back of all of those. And then the next step is to do cardstock cutting, and we need to make what's listed here under the cardstock cutting guide. So I'm going to cut my joining strips and my finishing strips to the dimensions that are listed, and for the ones that need some prep with scoring and 1/4 inch tape, I'll go ahead and get that done. So here's my container, and I have my finishing strips all prepped and my joining strips prepped, and these are my ledger strips. I'm using black chipboard just so it'll be easier for you to see. Yours would of course be out of craft chipboard. Now we're ready to cut out our pattern paper for the sides of the buildings only. We're not going to cut out any roofs or doors or anything like that at this point, just the sides. And we will refer in the templates. There is a sheet called Pattern Paper Layout, which has all of the different pages listed that are in the Tim Holtz. If you're using a different paper, then you would just choose whichever one you want for the buildings and follow what it says here to get the most out of your paper. So you'll need that, and then you'll also need the cutting guide that we just used for the chipboard, because it tells the size of the pattern paper, which is basically the size of the sides of the chipboard that we cut. Now, we're only going to do the 8x8 at this point, so we won't do anything for the North Pole, which is building 2, but we'll do all the other buildings, but again, just the sides. And so I'll just start here with, when we look at this template or paper layout, the first number is the building number, and then it tells whether it's the wide sides, the narrow sides, or in the case of building 1, all the sides are the same width. So it just says 2 sides are coming out of one and 2 sides are coming out of the other. So let's just start by looking at this first one for building 1, and I'll pull that paper out. I call that one green dots and chevrons. It's green dots on, well, the dots are actually white, but it's green with white dots and then the chevrons on the other side, and that's what I've selected for building 1. Now, again, we're just going to do the sides, and when I look over here on my cutting guide, it says the pattern paper that I need is 4 shapes that are 3 by 4.5. 3 wide by 4.5 tall. And I'm going to get 2 of those out of one sheet and 2 of those out of the other. And when I cut that, I'll be very careful to not overcut it so that I keep the remaining paper. In this case, I'll need it for the roof. And you want to keep the maximum paper that you can. So 2 of those 3 by 4.5s out of one sheet and 2 out of the second sheet. So here are my 4 sheets that are 3 by 4.5, and I'm just going to open my baggie and put them in, making sure they stay nice and flat next to a big piece. And then I have these 2 pieces that I'll just set aside for now. Building 2, we said we were going to skip, so building 3 comes out of the paper that I call posies and wood grain. So there's the posy side, and here's the wood grain side, and I've got both sheets of that out here. Notice the wood grain direction is going this way, so that when you cut these pieces out, make sure that you've got the wood grain going in that direction. Now we're going to cut our wide sides out of one piece of paper, and we look over here and we see that for our wide sides we've got 2 at 4 by 7.25, and so I'm going to cut those 2 wide sides. So I'll cut the 7.25 inch length out of the whole piece of paper and then cut it in 4, and then I'll have a nice long strip left here at the bottom for the wide sides. So there are my 2 wide sides, and then from the other piece I'm going to cut the 2 narrow sides for building 3, and it says the pattern paper there is 2 at 1 1/2 by 5 15/16. That's a 1/16 less than 6 inches long. So we need 2 of those. So, and again, check that your wood grain is going in the direction, and we'll cut those out of this corner here. So I have these 4 pieces of paper, and I'm going to put them in my baggie for building 3. If it would make you feel more comfortable, you can of course mark these on the reverse side so you know what building they go with. And this is my scrap that I'll put aside. So for building 4, I'm using the one that I call black and red plaid, and on the back white words. The white refers to the color of the background, not the color of the words. So here's white with words on it, and then this is the black and red plaid. And when I cut these out, I'm making sure that both pieces are going in the same direction, and that here I'm going to make sure that the words are going in that horizontal like you would read them. It's not so critical here because we're not trying to get anything else out of it. So building 4, let's see what we've got here. We've got, out of one sheet, we're going to get 2 narrow sides, and they are 2 by 8, and one of the wide sides, which is 4 by 8, so that's going to use up the whole sheet of paper. And then from the other sheet, we'll get the other wide side that is 4 by 8, so we'll be left with a half a sheet of paper. So I go ahead and get those cut. So here are my 4 pieces for building 4, which go into the baggie. So building 4 has a special part added to it called an annex, and I'm keeping that in a separate bag to keep it organized. And we're going to cut that paper out of white with dashed lines, and the reverse is red, what I call paisley. It's not really a paisley, but you get what I'm saying. So there's the white with dashed lines, and so when we look at our cutting guide, this one's a little unusual. We only have to cut 3 pieces for it because the back of it gets attached to building 4 proper. So when we look over here, the annex front has patterned paper, one at 3 by 5.5, just one, and the sides are each 1 by 6, and we need 2 of those. So you can see those 3 shapes laid out here on our cutting guide. So I'll cut those 3 pieces out of one, and we actually only need one of these sheets, so I'll just put the other one aside. So here are my 3 pieces for the 4 annex, and I'll put those in my baggie. Building 5 is next, and we need 4 pieces. The sides are all the same at 2 by 6.5. So 4 at 2 by 6.5. And this is the paper I've selected. I call it dark red plaid and floral vertical. And so 2 by 6.5, we can just cut a strip off the bottom, and it's 8 inches wide, so get our 4 pieces that are 2 by 6.5 out of one sheet. So here are my 4 pieces for building 5. Building 6, the reindeer barn, we have 2 narrow sides and 2 wide sides. Let's start with the wide sides. So we need 2 that are 3.5 by 6.25, and they will come out of one sheet of paper. And this one I call green snowflakes and green and red plaid. And so there's the snowflakes. So I'm going to cut the wide sides, and we said 2 at 3.5 by 6.25. So I'll go ahead and cut those, and then I'll have kind of a L-shaped piece left over. So there are my 2 wide sides, and I'll just put them aside for a moment. And then for the narrow sides, we need 2 at 3 by 5 3/16. And 3/16 is a 16th less than a quarter. So 2 at 3 by 5 3/16, and I'll cut those out of this other sheet of paper. And we'll have a larger strip at the bottom left over, which we will eventually use for a roof piece. So make sure you cut these exactly on the line. So now we have our 2 wide sides and our 2 narrow sides that I can put in the baggie. So for building 7, we again have narrow sides and wide sides. This time let's start with the narrow sides. We need 2 at 2 by 8, and black with flowers, and the other side is green stripes. So there's the green stripes. And again, we want to keep those green stripes going vertically when we cut this out so that we'll have them in the right direction for the roof is actually going to be cut showing the green stripe side. So I said we'll start with cutting the two narrow ones, which were both 2 by 8. So I'll get those two narrows cut. So here are the two narrow sides, and then we have a 4-inch piece left over, and for our wide sides we need a piece that 2 at 4 by 6 and 15/16. That's a 16th less than 7 inches. So I can get one of those out of this piece. I'll just cut it to 6 and 15/16 long. And then I'll take my other piece, make sure that my stripes are going vertically, and I'll cut the other piece that is 4 by 6 and 15/16. So now I have my 2 wides and 2 narrows that I can put in my building 7 baggie. Building 8 is on the next page, and building 8, we have the main building, and then we have the annex, and we'll start with the main building, and we can have narrow sides and wide sides, and we'll start with our 2 narrow sides, which are 2 by 6.5, and this is the paper. I call it red plaid with black words. The background is black here. And when we cut out this roof piece that's up here at the top, we want to be able to cut that out of the same strip coming across here because we're going to use the word side. And so when I cut this out, I'm going to cut these pieces out of kind of the bottom section of it. It's not critical, but you want to make sure that the words are going in a horizontal direction this time so that when we put the roof on, all of the words will be going this way. So we said we're going to start with our narrow sides, and they were, we need 2 of them at 2 by 6.5. So I'm going to cut those out of one a piece here. So here are my 2 narrow pieces, and then continuing on down here, I'll get one of my wide sides, which is 3.5 by 5 7/16. That's a 16th less than 5.5. So down here, 3.5 inch wide, 5 7/16 inch tall. So I have one of my wide pieces, and I'll cut the other one, checking my word orientation, out of this bottom corner here. So I have all 4 pieces that I need for building 8. And last we have the annex for building 8, where we only need 1 wide side that is 2.5 by 4 1/4, and 2 that are 1 by 3 7/16. And if you look here under the dark red plaid floral vertical, remember we used 1 sheet. We had a little bit left over down here at the bottom when we cut out for building 5. Out of our second sheet, that's what we're going to use for the annex. Now, building 5 used the red side. On building 8 annex, we're going to use the floral side. There is enough here at the bottom so that when you cut this 1 wide side, that is 2.5 by 4.25. If you want to try to center that design on the 2.5-inch side, with the red stars, you can do that. You have to ignore this diamond pattern, but you can if you care about that kind of thing. When you cut out the wide piece, which is at the bottom, which is 2.5 by 4.25. We only need one because the annex gets glued to building 8. You can center that, just shift it over a little bit if you want to center it on those stars. So I just moved this over a tiny bit here, so I have my stars centered for this wide part. And now for the narrow part, I need 2 at 1 by 3 7/16. And again, if you want to, you may not be able to space both of them out so you get the stars equal, but one of them is going to face what I kind of call the front of the building. So I'm going to this is a 1-inch wide ruler, so I'm putting it down the center of a row of stars here, and I'm going to cut a strip, and then I'll move it over and cut the second strip. But again, you don't have to get that concerned about it. And now that I have these two pieces that are 1 inch wide, I need them to be 3 7/16 inches long, which is a 1/16 inch less than a half. So I'll cut these two pieces to length. And then I can put these 3 pieces in my 8A bag. So that completes the prep for the pattern paper for the sides of each building. And I've just organized all of my scraps here, and I'll put them back inside of the case so I know where everything is.